Wow, I sure hope I didn't forget anything in 2022. I played every Dragon Ball fighting game, Part 3. So we've gotten to the point where I've spent so much time playing Dragon Ball games in such a small time frame, I think my brain has been rewired to immediately shut off when booting any Dragon Ball related anything. I watched an entire episode of Dragon Ball Super the other day, and I couldn't tell you a single thing that happened. Anyways, this is the third and final part of playing every Dragon Ball fighting game. I originally didn't plan on spending the entire month of December just playing Dragon Ball games, but that's just kind of how it worked out. Either way, I hope you have enjoyed them so far. Speaking of, I want to thank everyone for a really awesome year. As of me making this video, I'm just a touch over 69,000 subscribers. I usually save this kind of thing for the end of the video, but this might possibly be the last video of 2022. So I just want to say that I'm really grateful that I get to make these videos for you all, and I can't wait to see what 2023 brings. And of course, I want to thank my patrons, including Melancholy in the Omega Gamer tier, and that's just Ash and Megan. In the Played Every Game tier, your support is, well, legendary. Thank you. Alright, let's get into the games. Dragon Ball Z Supersonic Warriors was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2004. This may come as a surprise to some, but this game and its sequel were both developed by Arc System Works, the same company who went on to create Dragon Ball FighterZ, and, you know, a couple of other games, I guess. Visually, this game is actually really nice for its hardware. It's got a very cartoony anime aesthetic, and it's absolutely iconic in my opinion. It reminds me a lot of the Super Nintendo games, actually. The actual presentation is nice too, with tons of dynamic elements in the menus and moving backgrounds that aren't too visually distracting, but work really well. In actual fights, the characters are 2D, and the backgrounds are kind of pseudo Mode 7 style 3D that seems to be using a ton of parallax layers to give the illusion of depth, and it looks pretty damn good for a Game Boy Advance game. The character art is also really nice, and the key and beam effects are short, but really effective and look exactly as you would hope for them to in this style. You know, like beams. As far as gameplay goes, this is probably one of my favorite fully 2D Dragon Ball games ever. It's super snappy, super responsive, and movement just feels insanely good. You fight on a 2D plane using between 1 and 3 characters that can be tagged out at almost any time. Double tapping in any direction gives you a short dash. You can do normal heavy melee attacks and lighter but much faster quick melee attacks with the face buttons. Holding down the attack buttons will guard, and if you hold down the R button, you can fire both small and large ki blasts by tapping the attack buttons. When used neutrally, the R button charges ki, and if you hold it down and move, you can spend some ki to fly quickly toward the opponent. You can also tag in other characters by pressing L. If you have at least 50 ki, you can use a super move by holding down the R button and pressing both attack buttons at the same time. At 100% ki, you can use an even more powerful move with the same button combination. You know, I feel like I could have explained that in far fewer words, but the past is the past. The future is now. At the top of the screen, there's a tug-of-war gauge, and this is actually a unique guard crush mechanic. Both guarding and countering heavy attacks will take down this gauge, and if it goes all the way down, you'll be incapacitated for a few seconds. If one character links enough attacks, you can actually get a small screen transition with a fun little animation too. Finally, let me quickly explain how the characters work. Every character has 3 levels. Sometimes the levels are just increased strength, but other times the character's appearance can change, like young Gohan switching to adult Gohan at level 3. In some modes, when you're selecting a team, using a higher level character will make it so you can only choose 2 characters rather than the full 3. Also, you can choose the same character multiple times if you want to, essentially giving your character extra health bars. This mechanic is actually used this way in some of the story fights too. I absolutely love how deceptively simple this game is. It doesn't have a whole bunch of complicated mechanics, and that's completely fine because it's a joy to play and the mechanics that are there are really solid. If you picked up this game for the first time, I guarantee you could figure out how to play pretty decently in the first couple of minutes, and I think that's a testament to just the great game design here. The modes in this game are Story Mode, Z Battle Mode, Challenge Mode, Free Battle, Training, and Link Versus. I'll focus on the notable ones here. Story Mode is available not only on a per character basis, but also in 3 distinct story arcs. The character stories all focus on that single character, while the arcs have you playing through as multiple characters. These are fight after fight broken up by dialogue scenes, and it's pretty straightforward, but it works nicely. honestly. I like the addition of actual artwork here and there, which is shockingly nice for the system the game is on. This story mode does sometimes kinda play fast and loose with the canon though. Challenge mode is a mode where you can build a team and fight against other teams that have varying difficulty levels. Now, there is a shop mode in this game, and it includes things like additional characters, new difficulty options, and a museum mode. Speaking of, the museum mode is neat, albeit a little simple. It allows you to listen to sound effects, music tracks, and view images from the story mode. It's not in-depth or anything, but it's nice, especially seeing something like this on the Game Boy Advance. And you all know that I love gallery mode, so one last thing I want to mention about this game, everyone has an ultimate ability, but by far, the coolest one is Frieza's. If you're able to successfully pull it off, the background music completely stops and you start hearing destruction sounds in the background. A timer pops up on the screen and starts counting down, and if you manage to run down that timer, the planet is destroyed and the win goes to Frieza. I love things like this that play with the normal gameplay loop and switch it up a bit. Supersonic Warriors as a whole is just a solid package. I may be a bit biased as I grew up on this game, but it really is a ton of fun to play even today. The gameplay is zippy and there's quite a bit of content packed into it. I never really hear people mention this game all that much nowadays, but I would definitely recommend giving it a shot if you never have before. Dragon Ball Z Supersonic Warriors 2 was released for the Nintendo DS in 2005. This game has an incredibly similar presentation and gameplay style to the first, but it's clearly evolved in a few ways. Right off the bat, you can see that the backgrounds are now fully rendered 3D models, rather than a pseudo Mode 7 thing we saw previously. The sprite work is also slightly more detailed too. The menus aren't as flashy this time around though, but they're still perfectly functional. Looking at the gameplay, it looks really similar to the first game, at least on the surface. In my opinion, you can still pick this up and figure it out pretty quickly, but there are some mechanical differences. Movement still feels really responsive and just good overall. The buttons are a bit different now though. Guarding is now done with a face button, and the L button is kind of a situational button from Awakened Skills and the like. Also, changing characters is now done by tapping on the touchscreen at the bottom. Additionally, some characters aren't technically playable in this game and exist only as support characters that you can summon for positive effects. This game also increased the key capacity from 100 to 200, meaning that if you wanted to, you could send out up to 4 specials in a row. However, they have shaken up the special system a little bit. One of the big things that changed here is the situational abilities. If your key is above a certain amount, or if you're playing against a certain character, you can use special abilities like Awoken Skills or certain buffing abilities. This makes the fights feel a bit more dynamic, but I can't say that I don't miss the simplicity of the last game, at least a little bit. That being said, some of these moves actually look really flashy and cool, so I can't complain too much. This game also introduces beam struggles, something notably absent from the previous game. When you and an opponent use a special attack at the same time, you go into a beam struggle, seemingly regardless of whether or not you were using a beam attack. During the struggle, you can mash buttons to push your beam toward the opponent. It's fairly easy to do though, maybe a bit too easy in my opinion. Finally, a new but in my opinion underutilized feature is the team arts. When you have a compatible team and a completely full team gauge, you can activate team arts, which are ultimate moves that deal a ton of damage, and these are probably the flashiest moves in the game. However, there's only a tiny few possible matchups here, and I think this could have been a really cool mechanic to do matchups that you would have never seen otherwise, like, I don't know, Frieza and Broly, or Gotenks and Captain Ginyu. I like this feature, but I ended up not really having a chance to use it most of the time, unfortunately. On to the modes. There's Z Battle mode, Story mode, Maximum mode, Free Battle, and Versus Battle. The story mode is, like the previous game, on a per character basis. This time though, it's not just a linear cutscene to fight to cutscene mode, and instead features a branching path select, which reminds me a lot of Super Mario World actually. While it's still basically linear, some paths are blocked off unless you complete the previous chapter under specific hidden conditions. These chapters largely include both movie content and sometimes even what-if scenarios too. Oh, and Beerus is in this game? Oh, never mind. The story mode is fine. It's an improvement over the first games, and I like the special scenarios that aren't scared to play outside of the established story, but there's only so much that you can really do with text descriptions of events in a game like this. Z Battle mode is basically just this game's arcade mode. You select a team and then you fight a bunch of rounds against different opponent teams. That's pretty much it. Maximum mode is an unlockable mode with 3 difficulty tiers, ranging from Novice to Mania. The actual interface looks similar to the story modes, and it's basically just a challenge mode with progressive massive difficulty increases. As you complete battles in this mode, you unlock more characters and more transformations. So while I did say I played Supersonic Warriors a lot as a kid, I never actually played Supersonic Warriors 2 until a few years ago. Because of that, getting used to this game's slightly different mechanics took a shocking amount of time to acclimate to, and even now I still find myself trying to play it like the first game, which just doesn't work. It's a good game though, and while I honestly have more nostalgia for the first game, that doesn't take away from the fantastic game that is the sequel. I think the only thing I don't like is the controls feel a little bit less intuitive, but again, I am definitely biased here. At the end of the day, I recommend playing both the first and second games because they've still aged pretty well. I think that if they were both re-released in a modern collection or something for like the Switch, they'd probably be pretty well received. Super Dragon Ball Z was released in arcades in Japan and Europe in 2005 and 2006, followed by a wider home console release for the PlayStation 2 in most regions. Alright, first let's talk visuals. This looks visually on par with the Budokai and Budokai Tenkaichi games, albeit with a slightly altered art style. While those games go for full cell shading with flat shaded environments, this one goes for the full cell shading look with more of a watercolor aesthetic in the environments. Also, because the environments are smaller scale, they seem to be a lot more detailed here, with extra background elements like side characters doing little looping animations in the background. Oh, and a lot of the stage geometry is destructible too, which is a really nice touch and just adds for immersion in my opinion. This game also has an incredibly cool looking dynamic title screen. Every mode has subtly animated characters and an audio clip from Goku briefly describing the mode. I don't know, I just really love seeing something more creative than a static menu or grid with a basic list of options. The gameplay here is very different from what you'd see in your Budokai or Xenoverse games. Instead, this has sort of a Tekken-ish battle system where you're fighting on a 3D stage and you can move left, right, in, and out. The controls are pretty simple. There's a light punch, a heavy punch, a block, dashes, and movement on the shoulder buttons. There's also a jump that can be used twice to fly, though the flying can get kind of annoying since there doesn't seem to be a locked baseline flying height, and this can lead to you and the opponent being on two completely different levels and being unable to hit each other for a second. There's also button combinations which seemingly do the same functions as the shoulder buttons like dashing, but also allow you to grab the opponent. Speaking of dashing though, you have two gauges in this game, the special gauge at the top of the screen and the action gauge at the bottom. Using movement dashes and abilities causes your action gauge to deplete, while using strong special moves causes your special gauge to deplete. You can use these special moves by inputting directional and button combos, exactly as you'd expect from a traditional fighting game. These moves can be melee attacks, ki blasts, and even some transformations. If you have one of your special gauges full, you can use a character's ultimate ability, which is usually a supercharged beam attack. Finally, there's a move called the Dragon Finisher that's basically a super move and can only be used when the opponent is under a certain amount of HP. These are the flashiest moves in the game and have little mini cutscenes that play if you can pull them off. I kind of enjoy how this game feels to play. It's responsive, and once you get into a groove and learn how to relentlessly attack the opponent, it becomes way more fun, especially when you're finding clever ways to keep your action gauge up. So I'm gonna talk about the modes here a little bit differently because almost all of them are actually weirdly interconnected. The modes listed on the title screen are Original, Dragon Summon, Z Survivor, Versus, Customize, and Training. So in customization, you can create what's called a character card. This is basically a save file where you have a character, your username, and the character's skills and traits. At baseline, this character is average and has no extra skills or buffs. It's sort of like the build-up mode from a couple of the previous games, but in this one, your character doesn't necessarily start at a total disadvantage. Once you've created your character in customized mode, you can then take them into Z Survivor. Z Survivor is a survival mode where you fight progressively harder battles, and when you win, you earn experience points for your character and you're able to spin a wheel for a chance at health regeneration, a stat boost, or 1 or 2 Dragon Balls. Speaking of Dragon Balls, Dragon Summon mode is a mode that you can only use once you've collected all of them with at least one character card. When you summon Shenron, you're given the option to either unlock normal stuff like characters or boost your current character's stats in some way, including learning skills, getting positive effects, and even learning the moves of other characters. My favorite part about this mode is actually the fact that every character has their own summoning scene with a unique voice line. Original mode, which is weirdly named, is literally just an arcade mode, and it's called Original because this game is based on an arcade game. It's a straightforward arcade mode with multiple fights. You have the option of either choosing a character card or selecting a character without a card, but there's more benefit in choosing a character card since you can upgrade upgrade them in this mode similarly to the Z Survivor mode. That, and every win in this mode nets you a Dragon Ball. That being said, the enemies do get pretty tough, and not having a stat advantage can probably lead to the later fights being pretty difficult to complete. Really, that kinda leads me into a deeper issue though. There's no way to play this game without interfacing with the customization. Sure, you could just play the versus mode with another person and ignore it entirely, but in order to play the single player content without hitting a massive difficulty wall, you have to use the character cards and you have to upgrade them. This might be fine for some people, but others might just want a traditional experience without any of the added fluff. Anyways, before I wrap up my thoughts on this game, I want to talk about the character roster here. While we're normally used to modern Dragon Ball games with like 1,000 characters on the roster, this game has a respectable selection of core Z fighters and the main villains. However, in my opinion, they went the extra mile and added in a couple of wild cards, including Chi-Chi, whose moveset is a pretty big throwback to some old Dragon Ball stuff, and Ultimate or Mystic Gohan, who I don't think I've ever actually seen playable in a Dragon Ball game, at least not in this form with this outfit using a sword. I think the only time I've ever seen this before is maybe like Shin Budokai? Overall though, I think this game is mechanically excellent, at least for me, someone who isn't great at fighting games. Unfortunately, I also feel like this game lacks any kind of story content, which I think is kind of important in licensed games like this. Even a what-if side story would have been fine. That being said, the Z Survivor stuff was actually pretty fun and engaging at the end of the day, and it feels kind of like a prototype version of some of the things that we'd see in a modern Dragon Ball game with, you know, custom characters. Of course, I did have my complaints, but some could argue that it was nitpicking. Would I recommend this game? Absolutely, actually. Feels pretty good to play, and once you figure out how the mechanics work, you'll probably have a good time. Dragon Ball Kai Ultimate Butoden was released exclusively in Japan for the Nintendo DS in 2011. Let's start with my absolute favorite thing about this game. The visuals and presentation in this are ridiculously good for a DS game. Not just that, but the cutscenes are some of the best in-engine cutscenes I have ever seen in a DS game. And I've played a lot of DS games. Actually, they're even good, in my opinion, by console standards. I never expected to see so much effort put into the cutscenes in a licensed fighting game on a handheld device, but here we are. Cutscenes and presentation aside, the visual style is kind of a half-measured chibified style, I guess. The characters aren't fully tiny, but their proportions are definitely changed to fit more of a toon style, and it honestly works. I like how it looks, especially since the faces are surprisingly expressive. Overall, this is an excellent example of great art direction and using this hardware to its full potential. Oh, and there's this neat little thing this game does on the title screen, where if you let it sit long enough, new characters show up, and there's even little cameos in the background too. Gameplay. So this game has Butōden in the title. However, this game plays not how I expected. At least not at all like a Super Butōden game. It feels pretty good to play, but I don't see the Butōden connection. I also have some complaints. Let me get into the nitty-gritty first though. This is, like most of the games we've already talked about, a standard fighting game where you have a light attack, heavy attack, ki blast, jump, movement, and a guard if you're not moving. You can also use directional and button inputs to trigger special moves, or use the touch screen on the bottom to select a special move to use. These moves cost ki, which recharges over time depending on your mode. There are 3 modes that you can control using the little arrows on the bottom touch screen. The standard mode is a balanced mode where you have standard attack power and standard ki regeneration. Pressing the down arrow puts you in a mode that seemingly makes you weaker but recovers ki way faster, and going up puts you into a mode that actively drains your ki, but it seems to buff your power. Speaking of going up, you can also jump twice to go into fly mode, which doesn't do any kind of transition and shockingly doesn't affect the gameplay too much either. That's a welcome mechanic. Pressing all 4 face buttons at the same time does kind of a burst move that can help you escape hit stun and also deals a little bit of damage. Using ultimate abilities, which cost the most ki obviously, puts you into a mini cinematic scene where you play a mini game, believe it or not. If you're the attacker, you play first. These little games range from a reaction time based tapping game to a game where you move a little cursor around to collect orbs for points. The opponent, on the other hand, has the option to defend, deflect the attack, or counter with their own. Defending doesn't require a minigame and is the default option. Deflecting and countering requires you to play the same minigame as the opponent and get a higher score. If you can't, you lose and the attack hits. So when doing standard attacks in this game, you can chain them into combos. It looks cool and it feels responsive, but herein lies my issue with this game. While the attacks do feel good to connect into combos super easily, I can't help but feel like this game is almost playing itself at times, and I'm just kind of mashing the attack button. There's very little strategy involved here outside of timing your attacks and breaking combos. Unlike a game I haven't talked about, Dragon Ball FighterZ, in this game you'll be put into situations where you can occasionally make a strategic decision, but usually it just moves really fast and you're just mashing a single button. There's even a mechanic where you get into these little back and forths with the opponent, and these feel even more like the game playing itself. Either way, what matters is that the gameplay in general is fun, and I can see this bothering some people more than others. So let's take a look at the modes. We have a story mode, challenge, versus, wireless versus, training, and customize. Story mode looks a lot like the story mode we saw in Supersonic Warriors 2, but this time it's not broken down by character, and it's just one big story mode separated into 8 chapters. When you select a chapter, there's usually a full cutscene with 3D models, and sometimes there's even voice acting. They really went above and beyond with these cutscenes, which is insane for a DS game. The actual fights sometimes are straightforward fights, or they'll be cut off to allow for a cutscene to happen, only to continue the fight with a different playable character. While this game is entirely in Japanese, it looks like it sticks pretty close to the actual story, and while it doesn't cover everything by any means, it seems pretty faithful. Of course, this is based on Dragon Ball Kai, which specifically trimmed the fat, but it is still interesting to see that this is the game where they really went all in on the story. Again though, these cutscenes are really great, and it's a lot of fun seeing this story play out in a completely different medium, in a completely different style. Challenge mode is the mode where you can play a series of challenges with different requirements and difficulties. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't get too much into the challenge mode because I honestly didn't have the time, and it was all in Japanese, so some of the novelty on the scenarios was pretty lost to me. Customize mode allows you to use in-game money to buy both accessories like hats and belts, along with special buff items that seem to add in-game benefits. These customized characters can be used optionally in most of the modes too, and while I do like customization options, I don't usually mess with this kind of stuff in games outside of the default outfits unless it's a custom character. So overall, my thoughts on this game are that it feels good to play and it's overall enjoyable, but I'm not entirely sure where the Butoden name comes from here. This is another case of I really wish this game was released in the West, solely because it has great production value and overall it is pretty fun. Dragon Ball Z Extreme Butoden was released for the Nintendo 3DS in 2015. If Butoden wasn't super enough, if it wasn't ultimate enough, how about extreme? This game presents itself as, well, Supersonic Warriors 3. At least it definitely takes a lot from Supersonic Warriors. And to be fair, it is made by the same company, Arc System Works. First off, the visuals. This style is basically, again, an evolved version of Supersonic Warriors style. Very pleasant 2D sprite work in front of pretty detailed 3D backgrounds. It looks good, and the visual presentation is one of this game's strong points. Gameplay-wise, the movement still feels a lot like Supersonic Warriors, but with some tweaks. You have the standard movement mechanics like I've described 1,000 times, along with separated ground and sky battles with similar gameplay, just separated by meteor smashes or special moves. You can charge ki with the R button, and you can use a basic special by holding the L button and pressing A. If you want to use combo attacks, you have to attack with a certain pattern, and some special moves can be linked from these patterns. There's some moves that can't be used unless you're awakened though, which happens when your HP drops low enough. My biggest complaint about this game is that because of this awakening mechanic, you rarely, if ever, see the character's ultimate abilities. The reason for this is because, well, the game just isn't that hard. You see, the only way to use an ultimate is for your HP to be low, but even when that rarely happens, you probably can't hit the opponent enough to even initiate the combo without them getting KO'd right in the middle of it. It's really disappointing, and it makes me wish the ultimate move had a standard button input that didn't rely off of previously executed combos, and it soured me a lot on this game as a whole. Now, to be fair, you can still use some cool specials without being awakened, but I mean, come on, who doesn't want to use ultimate moves in a Dragon Ball game? Anyways, you can switch characters by tapping on them on the bottom screen, and support characters return in a similar way from how we saw them used in Supersonic Warriors 2. The modes in this game are Z Story, Adventure Mode, Extreme, World Tournament, Extreme, Survival, Battle, Versus, and Quest Mode. Z Story Mode is initially a linear story mode that covers the major beat of the Dragon Ball Z story. Once you complete complete the main story, you unlock character-specific what-if stories. These are presented in a similar way to how we saw Supersonic Warriors handle its stories. It's all text-based cutscenes with character images and small descriptions of what's going on. However, it, again, leaves a lot to the imagination. In fact, this game does something weird, and it's kind of jarring. Characters will describe what's happening so you can use your imagination, and the game is not at all subtle about it. While I think it's cool they wanted to include the major story beats, we've already seen it a ton of times at this point. I don't really have a solution for making the scenes better though, maybe focus more on movie content, I don't know. Anyways, once you complete Z's story, you unlock Adventure Mode, which seems to be its own original story, which I guess addresses my previous complaint immediately. In this mode, you go from mission to mission, Super Mario World style, and every mission has both mission requirements and rewards for performance, usually in the form of a character unlock or a support character. In this mode, you also can earn currency in the form of Zenny, which can be used to buy items that boost stats and give you certain advantages. A lot of these are single-use items though, but they can give you an edge in these fights to increase your ranking and more easily unlock characters and supports. Quest mode is a mode that takes advantage of the 3DS's Street Pass functionality, and man, do you really think I'm gonna run into someone that is A, carrying their 3DS around in 2022, and B, actively playing this game? So I have an issue. I don't know if it's fatigue from playing so many Dragon Ball fighting games in such a short period of time, or just from this specific game not clicking with me. I just could not make myself have fun in this game. It seems to be relatively well liked from what I can find online, but fun is subjective, I guess, and I just didn't have much fun. So overall, my opinion on this game is actually one of surprise. Surprise that I didn't like it all that much, at least not compared to the Supersonic Warriors games. This game nails the visual style and the presentation, at least during gameplay, but the gameplay itself leaves something to be desired, mainly because of the combo special system. Would the average fighting game player enjoy this game? I'm sure they would. This game still feels fun to play, and so far every Arc System Works game I've played for these videos has been excellent mechanically. This one just feels like a weak point is all. Know what Arc System Works game isn't a weak point though? Dragon Ball FighterZ was released on all major home consoles and on PC in 2018. Visually, this game is one of the most beautiful games I have ever played in my entire life. Seriously, the art direction here is top notch, and at times, it feels like I'm watching an anime cutscene. This game uses the technique that a lot of recent Arc System Works games have used, where the 3D models are both lit and animated as though they were 2D animation, leading to some incredible optical illusions that make this game feel like it's straight up anime, and that aesthetic is as perfect as you can get for representing Dragon Ball Z or any anime in a video game. If every Dragon Ball Z game used this aesthetic from now on, I wouldn't even be upset. Seriously, it looks so good. Though I totally understand that a lot of this is basically just optical illusions and highly controlled shading effects from specific angles, so that probably isn't super realistic, at least not for a game with a player-controlled camera. Anyways, as for gameplay, this is the standard fighting game formula, but with some unique elements in what I consider to be newbie-friendly mechanics. You've got all the normal movement with light, medium, and strong attacks. I don't feel like I need to explain all of that again. This game does auto combos though, which means that you can get really flashy combos just by continuing to press the attack buttons. The difference here from the Butoden game that I was complaining about though is that you can actually switch up your attacks, and there's actual incentive to change it up and use different attacks, especially when the opponent can counter you very easily. There's also key charging and special moves. Basic special moves don't cost ki, but the more powerful ones do. On top of that, you can use assists by pressing the trigger buttons, and can even include those assists in both combos and special moves. There's also a move that you can use which works kind of like a grapple and can force an opponent to switch to a secondary character, which I think is really cool and deepens the strategic options available to the player, especially since the characters you've swapped out gain back some HP. I also want to mention Sparking Blast, which can be activated once per match and gives you a big boost in damage, ki recovery, and even allows you to cancel combos. There's a whole mechanic with the Dragon Balls here too. During every match, completing auto combos and dealing a high combo attack can get you a Dragon Ball at the bottom of the screen. When all 7 Dragon Balls are collected, the next player to clear one of those requirements can summon Shenron and wish for one of 4 things: a complete restoration of their HP, bringing an ally back to life, giving an additional use of the sparking blast, or giving a passive health recovery to the current character even while they're fighting. This Dragon Ball mechanic is neat, but you barely ever see it just because the requirements are kind of hard to do within a single match and without someone winning beforehand. When it does happen though, it's pretty neat and can probably be a pretty big game changer, especially if you're on the ropes. Before I move on, I just want to say that this game does character-specific interactions masterfully. Not only do you get a bunch of interactions before and after matches, you even get them right in the middle of matches when a new character is coming out after a KO. Of course, I also have to talk about dramatic finishes too. So if you're using specific characters versus other specific characters on a specific stage and then end the fight using one of two specific attacks, you get what's called a dramatic finish. Almost all of these are inspired directly by scenes from the anime, and oh my god, are they beautiful. Like for real, they are mind-blowingly good, and I spent a good hour just recording footage of a bunch of different ones. This is the absolute best use of character-specific interactions that I have ever seen in a video game, and anyone who knows me knows I absolutely love character-specific interactions. This is just next level though, and it sets the bar really stupid high for me. Anyways, back to the normal stuff. This game's UI is unique to say the least. Remember how the Xenoverse games had you running around a hub area to access the modes? FighterZ does something similar, just in a completely different style and also a lot smaller in scale. Here, it's a little hub area where you can run around with little chibified characters that you unlock with a bunch of different costumes. You can also just open a menu to navigate the modes, but where's the fun in that? In this little hub area, you can run from place to place to find different game modes. But there's more! There's also a little shop where you can buy items using Zenny, like new hub characters and outfits. There's also this little fan club thing that you can join for specific characters too. Oh, and you can just run up to other people and initiate fights with them if you want to do that kind of thing. You of course also have the ability to modify your online profile player card thingy using stuff you've unlocked using Zenny. And there's a bunch of little layouts that you can use in a ton of unlockable titles. I of course got really cocky and called myself God of the Battlefield. I'm sure that won't come back to bite me in the ass. Obviously the easiest way to navigate this is just to open the menu though, and the menu reveals that this game has a ton of modes. The arcade mode isn't just a straightforward arcade mode. Instead, it's an arcade mode with multiple scenarios, and each scenario has branching paths. The way it works is that you choose your scenario and you begin the fights with your team. Your ranking at the end of each fight affects which path you take. Get a higher ranking, you go up a higher path, leading to better rewards and more challenging fights. Lower ranking, the opposite. This means that even the arcade mode has replay value as you improve your skills over time. I really like how this is done here. It feels fair and it molds itself to your skill level. You still feel challenged, and even when you don't do as well as you hope, you can come back later and try again at the higher branches when you've gotten a little bit better at the game. As is a trend with this game, the story mode is really good, at least in my opinion. It's broken down into 3 main chapters and it's a completely original new story. The whole thing has to do with your soul inhabiting the main cast's bodies, and there's also this whole thing with this new antagonist, Android 21. The gameplay is broken down into cutscenes, a sort of game board interface thing, and the fights themselves. The general idea is you set up your party using characters that you've saved, and once the party's together, you move them around on this game board screen, which changes every chapter. This board is uniquely different from the thing that we saw in the arcade mode, as in this one you choose where you move. Most spaces have enemies, and as you move along the board, the enemies grow stronger in level. Some spaces have specific rewards, like unlockable characters to add to your party accompanied by a boss fight, and generally these are the spaces that you're headed towards. Of course, you can beeline to the boss battles, but then you'll miss out on experience. Speaking of experience, there's a leveling system here, but also an equipment system. There's a bunch of stuff that you can unlock, and most of the stuff is stuff that boosts your stats. When you get into fights, you use the party that you have set up, and after the fights are over, the characters recover a little HP if they lost any, but not all of it every time. This kind of encourages you to mess around with your party composition, but there's another reason to mess with your party composition too. Something that I noticed in the story mode is that it seems like you get extra cutscenes during some missions if you have specific party compositions. The reason I sound unsure is because I wasn't able to 100% verify this, but based on searching online and watching other people's gameplay and comparing it to mine, it looks like this is the case. This means that playing around with team compositions might give you extra optional cutscenes that you might otherwise miss. If you're using specific characters in your party, they all get their own little moments too, separate from the group scenes. There's always a scene or two where that character gets the spotlight, and it's nice that there's a bunch of callbacks and references to the original story too. So the other modes include local multiplayer modes and online multiplayer modes. Because this game still has a pretty healthy online player base, I decided to give it a go. And let me tell you, it went poorly for the other person. You see, a mistake people make time and time again when they play with me is assuming that I play these online games on normal days. But you must understand that if you see me in an online game and you attempt to defeat me, you're falling right into my trap. During this particular match, Taco, it was opposite day. Yeah, I'm sure you felt great about that victory, but if you're watching this, just know that I was the true victor. So this game had a roster of around 20 characters at launch, but post-launch added enough DLC to effectively double the roster. In fact, most major characters from Dragon Ball Z and Super have some kind of representation here, and all of them have unique movesets that don't feel reused, redone, or even samey. I actually kind of lucked out for this video because I didn't own any of the DLC, but right when I started getting footage of this game, it all went on sale for 50% off. Lucky me. While I don't think this game will get any more characters at this point, I think the ones that are here are all excellent, and honestly, the game doesn't need a huge ever-expanding roster like some other games. So overall, I kind of expected this, but this game is actually my favorite of all the games that I played for these 3 videos. It just feels excellent to play, and there's no real weaknesses here to me. I only ever had a good time, and while I could sometimes get frustrated from, I don't know, losing a fight, that's more of a skill issue that can be improved with practice. Of course, the amount of fan service with the character-specific interactions, dramatic finishes, and just overall nice original story mode really sweetens the deal too. If there's only one game out of these last 3 videos that you play Dragon Ball FighterZ. It's that good. So I don't generally cover fan games in my main I played every game videos. However, I did want to make kind of a semi-exception here. Hyper Dragon Ball Z is a fan game made with Mugen, and the quality in this game is legitimately on par with an official title. It's really good. And while I won't be doing a full standard overview with all of my thoughts in this video, I do have a full segment going over the whole game over on my Patreon. So definitely check that out if you're interested in supporting the channel and seeing some extra exclusive content. Seriously though, try this game. It's very, very good. It's free to download on PC, and I'll stick a link to it in the video description. And that's it, we finally made it. That's every traditional style Dragon Ball fighting game. Now, of course, there's still a ton of Dragon Ball games that I haven't actually talked about yet on this channel, but that doesn't mean I won't be talking about them in the future. Keep an eye out for those because I definitely have some plans to cover all of that stuff eventually. Alright, I'm gonna go take a break from Dragon Ball games and watch some movies. For now though, I just want to thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a fantastic day.